Again, my name is Tarik Walker. I am a physician scientist and currently also a National Science Foundation LSAMP program director, and I'll talk to you about a little bit more about what that means later on. I'm a physician scientist in a variety of different areas, but my primary area is in health disparities, and will talk about what that means later. I've titled this "Only One Man's Path to Academia" because one, there are several paths to academia, and two, there are no gender-specific paths to academia, nor are there any ethnic-specific paths to academia. And I just wanted to kind of remind everyone that we all kind of walk in our own paths to wherever it is that we're ultimately trying to go. There's no right or wrong path. There's no path that's better than another, and some paths are very direct and short, and other paths can be very convoluted and long. So keep that in mind as you're kind of matriculating through your early career development, even at the high school or early college level. So before I sort of dive into my academic path, I just wanted to kind of share a little bit about who I am and kind of how I got to the place that I'm in. I grew up in Columbia, Maryland, just as a little backdrop. Columbia, Maryland is a planned community, meaning like back in the 1970s, probably before all of you were born, probably even including Sean, a developer came up with this idea to build a community on the East Coast that really encapsulated every ethnic group that would be willing to move to that community and raise families. So it didn't exist prior to 1970. My family was one of the first families to move to this area, but both of my parents are from the deep South, so this was a real cultural shock for them and change for them, but they wanted their children to be raised in a community that was very multicultural and very accepting of others. And so I don't know if you can see my screen, but this is me as a child. I had a very loving, supportive, and nurturing childhood. Again, I'm kind of dating myself here, but when I was a kid, we liked to race matchbox cars over these plastic tracks that you can see here. I also had a lot of came from a very multicultural community, and so most of my friends, close friends and buddies were from different cultures. My father, as you can see in the bottom center of the picture, was my soccer coach for the first 6 years of my soccer career, very limited soccer career. This is me right underneath his armpit here. And I didn't stray very far from him. And I show this picture not only to show sort of the multicultural type of community that I grew up in, which I think a lot of people might take for granted, but I show that to also say that I had a lot of support and nurturing as a young person, which I think was really my first platform for feeling like I could become a physician or I could become a scientist because I had very supportive and loving parents. I grew up a Redskins fan, although I detest the name, and our team is doing very poorly these days. I embarrassingly was and still am a fan to this Washington team. And as you can see, I graduated here back in the early 90s, and I was very successful as a high school student, just like yourselves. And again, all of that goes back to good nurturing, good family. It's not a prerequisite, but that was what was very instrumental in my early high school success. And I think it's fair to say also that when I was in high school, I had already kind of made up my mind that I wanted to become a physician. But that's not everyone, and it doesn't have to be everyone. Again, this is my mom here, my father to my right, and this is my best friend from high school. We graduated together from the high school community that I grew up in Columbia, and he and I actually ended up going to college together. So it was, so I said again, and this is my brother who's now he works at Twitter out on the West Coast, and I show these photos, my mom, my dad, my mom here again, my brother, and my best friend. I show these photos to really just again say that mentorship actually begins at home, not when you find a great laboratory mentor, not when you find a great university mentor, not when you find a great high school counselor to mentor you or teacher. It really begins at home. So these are my first early mentors in my life. And there's going to be kind of a repetitive theme behind a lot of these photos. So when I graduated from high school in Columbia, Maryland, I made the decision to go to Morehouse College. And I don't know how many of you all have ever heard of Morehouse College, but it is unique in the sense that it's a historically Black college in Atlanta, Georgia. It's where Martin Luther King graduated from. It's where Spike Lee, the producer of film, graduated from. It's where, who else? Many civil rights leaders and activists graduated from there. Benjamin Mays, Samuel L. Jackson, who did Pulp Fiction and also does all those Capital One commercials. It has a very strong track record, not only for the arts, but also for the sciences. And so my father, who is here on the right in the middle, graduated from there also. And just to kind of reflect back to when I was at the stage where many of you all are, my father said, well, so let's back up for a second. So I grew up on the East Coast, just outside of Washington, D.C. in Columbia, Maryland. And I actually had my heart set on two colleges to attend as an undergraduate. Johns Hopkins, because I had very strong intentions of going to medical school, and I thought if I went to their undergraduate school, that would really give me a platform for getting into their medical school later. And Georgetown University, because I was also contemplating law school. And my father went to Georgetown Law School, and I thought, wow, wouldn't it be great if I could follow in his footsteps? So I was very blessed and very fortunate to be accepted into Johns Hopkins and into Georgetown at the high school level. But those two schools are very expensive schools. And so my father said to me, well, you have a choice. You can either pay for Johns Hopkins and or Georgetown out of your own pocket, or you can go to Morehouse College, which is where I went to college, and I'll pay for it. So because I didn't have any money, the decision was kind of made for me. And I stomped and had many 18-year-old tantrums at the time. I remember this vividly. And then my father said to me, well, why don't you do this? Why don't you just go to Morehouse College's summer science program? Because I had applied to that as kind of an introduction to what I would need, what I would be doing as a freshman the subsequent year. Why don't you participate in their summer science program? And if you don't like it, if you really don't like it, then your mother and I will support you going to either Georgetown or Johns Hopkins. And I thought, oh, yes, this is great. I'll just go down, participate in this 8-week program, and come back and tell them that I couldn't stand it. And then my decision will be very easy. However, I went and participated in this 8-week summer program, again, at a historically Black college. All of my summer science professors were African American in chemistry and biology and physics. Those were sort of the core courses that I studied during that summer. And while I was there that summer in an unair conditioned dormitory in the heart of Atlanta, Georgia, I fell in love with Morehouse College. And I think my father probably knew that I would fall in love with it, which was probably part of his motivation for sending me to the summer science program. So that summer science program not only got me prepared um, psychologically for going to Morehouse, it kind of got me in a comfort zone and a familiarity with the school. But it really enlightened me culturally because up until that point, all of my high school teachers, particularly in the maths and the sciences and the STEM areas, had all been white. I didn't have one math teacher in high school that was black. I didn't have one science teacher in high school that was black or Hispanic for that matter. And so this was just so enlightening for me to experience this, to be sitting at the feet of educated scholars who are very excellent in teaching, who were like me. And that speaks again to how mentoring is really important when you have someone mentoring you or teaching you who you can culturally identify with. That's why it's no mystery that white students in general do very well when their mentors are white. It's why it's no mystery that Hispanic students tend to do better in their area when their mentors are Hispanic, or why women tend to do better in certain fields when their mentors are women. So it's not a coincidence, but it's something that we take for granted. And again, it's not a prerequisite for success. I have certainly had some incredible teachers and some incredible mentors in my career who have not been African American. But it really does make a difference when you're sort of in those early phases where you're trying to define yourself and trying to kind of craft a path for yourself to feel uplifted and to feel supported by folks who look like you and who are doing similar things that you're interested in. So that's kind of how I got to Morehouse. Um, as you can see to the left, this are some of my early experiences at Morehouse. This is me as a student, probably I think my freshman year in the dormitory. This is me with some other class colleagues. We actually started a tutoring program for inner city students in Atlanta. This is what's called a step show. I don't know if any of you all are familiar with the Black fraternities or sororities, but step shows are kind of an entertainment element of some of the good social work that they do in addition to their sort of downtime. This is a march actually on Martin Luther King Day. It's very hard to see in the corner here, but these are a group of KKK and skinheads that are surrounded by military protection as they marched in downtown Atlanta. And our leadership at Morehouse told our student body not to participate in this march against this, or an anti-march against this group, because they had concerns about us being, arrested or being physically assaulted. And however, none of us really paid attention to that. So this was kind of like my first introduction to social activism. And then another really cool thing that I experienced when I was at Morehouse, it's really hard to see here, and I apologize for that, but this is Bo Jackson at a panel discussion who was invited. He's from Alabama, which is not far from Georgia. And the man shaking his hand is another Morehouse graduate. His name is Dr. Lewis Sullivan. He was actually the first African American head of the Health and Human Services. So a lot of really great graduates to come out of Morehouse. So while I was at Morehouse, I was very blessed to have gotten what was called a Merrill Scholarship. It was named after Charles Merrill, who founded the company Merrill Lynch. It's a financial investment company. So I was fortunate to get a scholarship to travel abroad to England to study at, and again, I apologize for sort of the fine print, but to study at Lancaster University, which was sort of in the northern part of England, and uh, worked very hard there, continued to do sciences. And as you can see, I also had some downtime and kind of played around with some of my roommates from time to time. But again, it was a really amazing cultural experience because it was the first time I really kind of realized that um, folks who really want to study at the undergraduate level, whether it's here in the United States or whether it's abroad, we all have to make certain sacrifices. And I remember going to Lancaster and really bonding and connecting with many of my dorm mates and many of my classmates because they really had an appreciation for education. Some of them said to me when I first got there, like the first week I was there, I had like a ton, like 5 or 6 pieces of luggage, and they were asking me, why do you need 6 pairs of Levi's? Like, because most of these students, and I'm not even exaggerating, maybe had 1 or 2 pairs of jeans, maybe 1 or 2 pairs of sneakers. And it really just reminded me that, you know, students really put their education above so many other material things, especially the ones that work very hard to get into universities in the UK, for example. So in the UK, unlike here in America, not everybody gets to go to university. You have to um, apply, and you have to be sort of part of a very high percentage select group of people to get even admitted into most universities in the UK, because most of the universities in the UK are either free or they're either very, very low cost. So if you are not rich, then it's very hard to go to university in the UK unless you have very good grades and very good standardized test scores. So um, all of these students that are in these pictures here got to go to the university where I attended for free because they met certain requirements. And so, and then on top of that, once you're in university within the UK, excuse me, you have to graduate with at a certain threshold to even be considered for certain jobs in the UK. So for example, if you have below a B average in the UK, it's very hard to get into graduate schools, no matter what the graduate program is like. Same with their law schools, or so. It's a lot more competitive to go to college in the UK. So it gave me a very deep appreciation for kind of what students had to do to prepare to even get into colleges within the UK. When I was there, I also had the unique opportunity to travel. I don't know if you can see in this upper left-hand corner of the screen, but I'm holding what's called a camera. Most people now don't even use cameras anymore, but that kind of tells you how long it was ago that I went to the UK. This was one of my colleagues who was in a similar study abroad program, and we traveled together. This is another classmate of mine who went to Morehouse College. But again, going to college at a historically Black college, ironically, opened my door to other cultures in being able to go and travel abroad and to pursue some really amazing scholarship opportunities within my campus. So, yeah, these were really incredible opportunities. And these travel opportunities also shaped my desire to pursue academia, not only at a domestic level, but at an international level, which we'll talk about some more. So again, I know this is a repetitive theme, but it all goes back to having supportive friends, supportive family, supportive mentors. Mentorship starts at home. All right. So This is actually my first day of school in medical school at Johns Hopkins University. And this is me here in the front row. I thought that I was of the mindset that if I sat in the front row every day, that I would be better off academically than if I sat in the back or off to the side. So every day of medical school where I had lecture that I didn't miss because unless I was ill, I tried very desperately to sit in the front row. And I had some competitive friends who would always sort of challenge me to get the best seat in the front row. But this picture kind of dates myself because um, at Anschutz Medical School, for example, which I'm most familiar with these days, my understanding is that maybe like 5% of the students even attend lecture in person because most students get all of their lectures online or downloaded or taped previously. So it's almost like just the opposite is true now, that you have to you only come to lecture maybe as the exception and not the rule, but it was the rule when I was a medical student. And so I share this photo again to show that I went to Johns Hopkins Medical School, and my class was very diverse. I had I would say that the split between gender was about 50-50, and I would say that the ethnic minority representation was very commensurate and very level with the general population. So there were about 16 African American students in my class out of a class of 100 or so, and that's about 16%, which is a reflection of the population at the time. Similar numbers sort of tracked along other ethnic minorities. So I would say that Johns Hopkins was actually kind of ahead of the curve when it comes to trying to make sure that um, the student body population was balanced. What was not balanced, however, was the mentoring opportunities and the leadership opportunities. So once again, I went from Morehouse College. I had this wonderful year abroad and then back to Morehouse where all of my professors were African American. And now I was thrust into this predominantly white majority environment where all of my medical school professors, whether it was anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, cell biology, everyone was white again. And I believe that if I did not have that strong grounding within my HBCU, historically Black college university environment, I would not have been prepared for some of the challenges that I would face as a medical student at Johns Hopkins. So this was actually just shifting gears a little bit. This was my first summer after my first year of medical school. I got an opportunity to do some research at Brown University. As you can see, my lab partner and I were not dressed appropriately for the lab. We should be wearing socks and our legs should be covered, but this was a long time ago, so there were not as many strict rules around the lab. But I share this photo again to say that the mentors I had in the lab that summer were absolutely incredible. They really took me under their wing. I got to work in a metabolism lab that summer, where I studied really diabetes in mice. That was really kind of the crux of my work. And they treated me so incredibly. So again, I say this to remind the group that obviously not all of our mentors and supports have to come from one particular place or one particular ethnic group or one particular gender, but it is nice when you can have mentors and mentorship from folks that are going to be supportive of you. And this was really my first lab experience. And this was at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island. And so this slide here is actually a byproduct of my 8 weeks of research at Brown University. I got to be a second author of my very first publication. Dr. Philip Grapuso is a pediatric metabolic researcher who I still keep in touch with to this day, who gave me a platform and opportunity to actually publish a paper on the effects of insulin-like growth factor receptors in rats and mice. And um, by no means was I a seasoned researcher after this 8 week experience, but what Dr. Grapuso knew at that time was that if Tarik Walker didn't get something tangible from this summer experience, he wouldn't have the same type of platform going forward to be successful. And so, even though he did the lion's share of this work, he knew that there was an opportunity to reward me for the research efforts that I was doing over the summer. And so, again, it's important to identify really supportive, nurturing mentors as early as you can, because it's really going to impact what you do later. So I wanted to take a moment to just reflect on some of the challenges that I do recall as a medical student. And I'll just give one quick example so we don't run too far out of time. But when I was a first year medical student at Johns Hopkins, because each medical school class is very small and very intimate, usually somewhere between 100 and 150 or 200 students per class, and 200 is kind of on the very large end of the scale, but my class was 100 students. And so all of your professors know you, all of your lab instructors know you. So if you miss a class, sometimes they might shoot you an email and say, hey, I didn't see you in class or in lab today. And so just as an example, my first week of medical school, I was so nervous. Even though, like, as I mentioned, I had a very strong foundation. Johns Hopkins Medical School at that time was ranked the #1 medical school in the country. And I really wanted to represent myself well, not only as a Morehouse College graduate, not only as an African-American student, but I wanted to represent my family and do everybody justice and make everybody proud. So my first week, we had a cell biology quiz. The very first week, and I scored a 93. I remember this like it was yesterday. So I scored an A on the quiz, and I thought, yes, I've made it. I've arrived. First quiz. My second quiz was an anatomy quiz, and I scored a 74. Now, in medical school, that's like equivalent to a C average, and anything below a B at my medical school was actually considered not passing. So you had to score a B or above to kind of be passing at my medical school at that time. And so I thought a 73 was not great, but I didn't think it was the end of the world. However, my anatomy professor called me into his office and he said, hey, I have a lot of concerns about you in this grade. And I said, well, it's my first anatomy quiz. I'm sure I'll do better the next time. I did study and prepare for this, but I don't know what happened. That was really my only excuse at the time. And he started actually asking me where I went to college, what kind of background I came from, very intrusive questions that I didn't think an anatomy professor should be asking me. And then at the end, but I was very gracious, and I tried to be pleasant, and I told him all of the answers to his questions. And then at the end, he said to me, well, a lot of students that go to historically Black colleges don't always do as well, as some of our students here that come from Yale or Harvard or. So basically, he was berating me and my college, and I sat there for about an hour, and I took every criticism, and I was just on the inside, my heart was palpitating. I wanted to just really let him know how I felt about him, but refrained. And then I remember going back to my dorm and sharing some of this with some of my white colleagues who actually, some of them actually went to Yale and Stanford and, Berkeley, and I shared this with them, and they were just, not only were they outraged by the way this professor dealt with me, but several of them actually scored lower than I did on this anatomy quiz. And one of my colleagues who went to Yale, who scored lower than I did, told me that he had the same conversation with this anatomy professor who called him into his office. And the anatomy professor told him, well, I think this was probably just an anomaly. You went to Yale, so I don't expect this to happen to you again. So it was a very different kind of conversation. So that was really my very first introduction into real blatant bias and racism, even within the medical school that I knew at most of your ages, 15, 16, that I really desired going to. That was the first of many challenges that I'm not going to get into, but know that if you're not strong in your cultural identity, your self-identity, and who you are and what you can become, those kind of interactions might take you in a negative direction. But if you're strong in who you are and your identity, you'll stay the course. You won't let comments or perceptions like that define you or dictate your next move. So just keep that in mind. So the paper that I share with you was my second author paper. These are just a few of some first and second author papers that I've done since. Actually, one is a book chapter. And I just share these to say so the one at the top is actually a paper that I published that actually is about research that I've done around quality of life in patients with a very specific pulmonary condition. The second paper is about young adults and adolescents and how HIV prevention can be conducted in a productive way within research practice. And then the last one is actually probably one of my favorite papers, which I published around African American and Latinos' attitudes around bias within the medical profession and how that impacts the decisions that they make. So I share these papers not to promote myself, but to just say that there are lots of areas in which one can do research and one can practice medicine. A lot of times, folks who mentor will tell students, young people, hey, focus on one thing and don't stray from that pathway. But I just want to encourage you all to think about, to reflect on all of your gifts and all of your respective skill sets and recognize that you can do a variety of different things under a broad umbrella of research and that you're never confined to just one area. That's all this slide is supposed to show. And again, these are some other projects that I've worked on, again, that kind of reflect kind of my interest in diversity of ideas. So the one in this upper left-hand corner was a pilot study that I did around text messaging and emailing older people who have interstitial lung disease or pulmonary disease to see how that could impact their self-care. Another was a text messaging pilot program that I did in terms of disseminating messages to young people around the need to get HIV testing. And then this poster here at the bottom is some recent work that I've done around looking at the barriers to identifying autism in immigrant patient populations. So again, so many areas, and you all are even more blessed than my generation is when it comes to being able to explore a variety of different areas. The timing is excellent. Now, this slide is to show that we still have a long way to go when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to racism within healthcare. So as you can see, the top bar is on average what white or Caucasian physicians make annually, and the bottom bar shows what African American and Black physicians, and these are physicians that by and large do the same things, so um, it's not like one group is doing plastic surgery and another group is doing family medicine. This has been controlled um, for different specialties and subspecialties. And so there's no good explanation for this other than bias within our healthcare profession, which is kind of ironic because when I decided to go into science and medicine, I always thought, well, this would be a great area for me because it would eliminate um, racism and bias. The STEM fields tend to be more objective fields, right? Like in math, 2 + 2 = 4, whether you're a woman, whether you're white, whether you're Black, whether you're Latino, whether you're Asian. Um, However, somehow our system has still found a way to even make fields like science introduce bias within those fields. And so we still have a long way to go, and your generation is going to resolve this. Um, Specifically within engineering, the same is true. This chart shows broken down by ethnicity who actually gets degrees in engineering here in our country. And as you can see, the largest majority of engineers and bioengineers tend to be white. There's actually a pretty large immigrant community in that non-resident alien bar, the gray bar there. Unfortunately, many of those engineering students tend to go back to their home countries and cannot even apply the skills that they have learned here in America. And as you can see, the lower sort of Black and brown groups are historically and have historically been at the bottom. And this situation is not getting a whole lot better, but it is getting somewhat better. Even if you look within research, there's a disparity between how Black scientists get funded and how white scientists get funded. So there's a disparity there. There's a gap between, the average white scientist that applies for, let's say, NIH or NSF funding and how much they're awarded compared to Black scientists that apply for research funding and get funded. And some will say, well, a lot of times that's because some of the research that white scientists are engaged in, maybe like, let's say, cell biology or animal research, is not quite the same as maybe what some Black scientists might be studying, like in my case, health disparities or community health. But what that tells us is that our society does not always value the same types of research. So sometimes we put a premium on research that involves a mouse in a lab, but maybe we don't put the same premium on research that involves an inner city community and how they're dealing with HIV. So those kind of things also frame how we think about what has the most value even within the research topic. So think about that. Finally, and I'm running a little on time, so I just wanted to just quickly talk a little bit about the current research that I've been involved in, and that involves actually working with a global group of research scientists in pulmonology, looking at the genetics behind a condition called IPF, which is a pulmonary condition called idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, which basically causes permanent scarring of the lungs. There's no good treatment for it, and there's no cure for it, which is why this is an important genetic disease. And this genetic disease tends to affect some ethnic groups in a way that's more challenging than other ethnic groups, which is why I'm interested in this. I've been working for many years now with an international group of pulmonary fibrosis experts all over the world. And the goal is to kind of, again, understand the genetics around this very challenging pulmonary condition. Our target is to capture 10,000 individuals who have this condition. So far, we've captured about 7,000 of all ethnicities, and then to kind of look deeper at the genetics of this disease and this condition. And I'm not going to get into too many of the details around this, but this is kind of a map of where most of the patients in our study have come from. Mostly the United States, but also some representation in Europe, very limited representation in South America and Africa, and some out in Southeast Asia, and in Asia. And what, again, this reflects, again, is that this is a good example of how the communities that tend to be more resourced can provide more patient samples to our group. In fact, I've been to conferences where I've tried to solicit blood samples from pulmonologists in Africa and in South America, and folks have told me, well, we only have 2 pulmonary specialists in our country. And I said, you mean in the city of your country? And they said, no, in our entire country. So again, it shows that there's not only United States disparities, but there are global disparities. This is sort of just a table that kind of summarizes who we're working with and all the various hospitals. And I'm just going to quickly move through this, but I just wanted to share for some of you who might be interested in the genetics that of the some 8,000 patients that we have 4,500 of them that have idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, and we've identified loci that contain genes that account for about 35 to 40% of individuals with pulmonary fibrosis. We've published some of this work, and it looks like some of the genes that tend to be contributing to this condition are these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 candidate genes that we're going to ultimately try to sequence later. And let me just skip to this one. The main gene or promoter variant of a gene is this MUC5B promoter variant, which is a common variant that actually produces mucin in the lungs of these patients who have pulmonary fibrosis. And so if you have IPF and you have this MUC5B promoter gene, then you're more likely to suffer in a much more harsher way than if you don't have this MUC5 promoter variant. So this promoter gene variant is very powerful in determining how well a patient will do if they do have IPF. Their morbidity and mortality will be higher if they have this MUC5B gene. And if you have this MUC5B gene variant and you smoke, your prognosis is even worse. So, and we published a paper on this, a preliminary paper on this, which again just speaks to like how important publication and tangibles are when it comes to crafting a successful research career. So what we would like to do eventually is determine whether or not ancestry plays a real solid role in not only this particular MUC5B gene within IPF patients, but are there other genes within Asian, Hispanic, African-American communities that can be protective from getting IPF than other ethnic groups? Because it turns out, it looks like right now that white patients tend to be more susceptible to IPF than other groups. So that's why it's important to study genetics and to study other ethnic groups. And traditionally in our research practices, we often tend to focus on one group while excluding others, and that includes genders as well. So this is me in the lab doing some preliminary genetic work that I hope all of you will get an opportunity to to do at some point. And research doesn't have to be lab work. It can be a whole host of types of work. This is just another slide that just shows how it's important to not only promote your work in literature, but also through social media. And so currently, I am the LSAMP program director, which is an NSF-funded program to really designed to get students like yourselves engaged in STEM careers and STEM curriculum pathways for those careers, and to keep you on those careers. And I currently work with a series of community colleges, because a lot of times community college students don't get the same opportunities as traditional four-year students to do research and to get them on a STEM career pathway. So that's really where I am right now, and I look forward to your questions. And I'm sorry that that was rushed and that was a lot, I know, but hopefully there's still some time for some good questions.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, what made you go into the pulmonary kind of area of medicine and medical school?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I was actually really interested in working with a gentleman named Dr. David Schwartz. He's the chairman of the medicine department at Anschutz Medical Center. And um, and so Amber, part of my answer is actually personal. So my father actually passed away of fibrotic disease himself about 6 years ago, and so I approached uh, Dr. David Schwartz, who was my mentor, and I said, "Hey, I want to just do something in an area that really kind of honors my dad, and it can be like a little mini project. It doesn't have to be anything elaborate." Um, and he said, "Well, I actually have this project that I've been working on that involves about 22 countries, um, uh, you know, 7,000 patients, that I don't really have a lot of time to manage it. Do you think you could do this?" And I was thinking to myself, no, I cannot do this. But I said yes. And it was really an opportunity for me to learn more about genetics, really. Even though it's pulmonary specific, it's really a genetic project. But more importantly, again, my interest is in health disparities. So interested in looking at why certain health conditions affect some groups and not others, or why they affect people differently across their ethnicities, across their gender. So there are ethnic health disparities, there are gender health disparities, there are age health disparities. And so I really saw this as an opportunity to really kind of explore, okay, what is going on differently between ethnic groups when it comes to this particular disease. And also, if you look even deeper into this particular pulmonary area and condition, it not only affects, for example, Black people differently than white people, but it affects African Americans differently than Africans. So there are even other, and it affects Latino patients born and raised in America differently from South American patients, or patients born and raised in Mexico. So it's I find that this very interesting and intriguing, and I also think that it's kind of going to be kind of the next wave of medicine for your generation, because within my generation, we tend to treat patients, we tended to treat patients the same, whether you were Black male versus a white female walking through the clinic door. But now we're realizing, and that's why there are these areas called personalized medicine that are kind of taking shape now, we're realizing because there are not only genetic differences, there are ethnic differences, there are gender differences, that we can't treat each patient uniformly. And so genetics will be a guide for how we treat patients. Ethnicity will be a guide for how we treat patients. And that's not a race-based dilemma. It's actually a good thing within medicine to kind of be a little bit more tailored in our approach to certain patients. Does that make sense? Cool.
Um, when I took human anatomy last year as a freshman, and it was really challenging. Just every single day there was like a new chapter, and I felt like I just wasn't able to like retain the information like fast enough and wasn't absorbing it. But I really found that like working with other people, like really sitting down and like actually like studying together, it just really helps to bounce back with another person rather than me trying to like just sit at home in my bed trying to learn all these terms. um, but yeah, it's definitely like shaped me into wanting to go into medicine even more. Yes.
I think that's a really excellent share that you made, because I remember as a first year medical student, I just wanted to kind of isolate myself and study on my own and try to resolve not only science problems on my own, but just personal challenges and dilemmas on my own. And I found very early on that the students that were most successful in my medical school class were the ones that worked in groups and the ones that really shared resources and shared experiences. So I really appreciate you saying that. I don't know, anything that you want to talk about. I'm available, and Sean, I'm just so grateful for this platform and this opportunity, and grateful for this amazing turnout and this amazing group of students